Ladies and gentlemen, maybe welcome to season 3, episode 2 of Man Buns and Jesus. Uh, I am one of your hosts, Pastor Ben Olschlager, here in the great state of Michigan. With me today is Pastor Josh Laborious in the not so great state of California. And joining us today as we dive into Corinthians for the first time is the esteemed Father Ted, aka Pastor Bill Reedy, former admissions director for the seminary.
I like
Now,
how the AKA is his actual name.
you know, it's a thing. And now he is the equivalent of a pastor slash bum. Just itinerant.
Wow.
Wow,
Itinerant
calm down,
preaching,
Ben.
filling in, getting people in ship shape or trying to. And we are so excited to have him on today. Why are we excited to have him on today, Josh?
Uh, because he's a gem of a human being, Benjamin. We don't need any other reason than that, sir.
I go for insult. He goes for flattery. We'll see which one of those works better at the end.
Well, I'm hoping he's gonna buy me drinks or something at Best Practices. So.
Oh, you might hope. You might
No,
hope.
he'll give me the inside scoop on what's going on though.
He doesn't have a seminary credit card anymore. This is
Little do you know, he kept one. No, so we asked Father Ted Padre to come on because we're talking about 1 Corinthians 1, verses 10 through 17, and I think I'm going to read the verses so we're all on the same page of kind of what we're talking about here. And this is Paul writing. He says, "I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and the same judgment. For it's been reported to me by Chloe's people that there is quarreling among you, my brothers. What I mean is that each of you says, I follow Paul, or I follow Apollos, or I follow Cephas, or I follow Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God that I baptized none of you except Crispus and Gaius, so that no one may say that you are baptized in my name. I did baptize also the house of Stephanas. Beyond that, I don't know whether I baptized anyone else. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power." So that's kind of framing what we're talking about today. And specifically, kind of the title of this section, we're going to be talking about divisions in the church, kind of some of the different forms that takes, and what the way to handle those is. And that's kind of why we asked Father Ted on, because he's an intentional interim minister, which he can tell you a little bit more about. But one of the things he deals with is congregational conflict and situations that could very easily become conflicted situations. So we thought his insights and his wisdom would be really, really good to have in this situation. And also, he spent a lot of time in St. Louis, which we love our synod, and we love our brothers and sisters in ministry all over the synod. But there's a lot of division, and a lot of it is in St. Louis, where the synod is headquartered. So we might talk about that, but we all do want jobs at the end of this. So maybe we'll think about it. We'll let it marinate. So Padre, if you could just tell us a little bit about the ministry that you do now, and some of the training that you've been through in regards to especially division and conflict.
Sure. Intentional interim ministry is done intentionally so that we don't have unintentional interim pastors. We're trying to help congregations that maybe they had a long-term pastor, and so they really only know one pastor for the last 40 years, and a thought of anybody coming in and doing even the slightest thing differently is difficult. There's other times where decisions were made, not always on the part of the pastor, not always on the part of the people, sometimes both, one or the other. And to come in as an outside view of it, to look at the different systems within a church. We spend a lot of time entering, seeing the system, seeing what people are doing, talking about, and then begin to formulate change from within. We don't come in with a recipe that's going to quote unquote fix a congregation or a conflict. We come alongside them as somebody that hasn't been here for 40 years, but comes in with some tools to help them be equipped for forgiveness, for reconciliation, for dialogue, for enhancing what they're doing now so that there's transparency and accountability. Our training is done right now. It's half of it's done online for about 12 weeks. And then there's an in-person segment where you go, and they're very long days, but we went from roughly 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 or 9 at night. And each day just clicked right along. It is one of the best things that I've ever attended, where they keep it moving. And all of a sudden, somebody that normally would crash in the middle of the afternoon, while they have, coffee bar and everything for us. And then for me, who goes to bed early, it wasn't that bad. It was just like we kept on going and we were involved in dialoguing. This is my second interim, and did one in Albany, New York, and now I'm here in Denison, Iowa, which is kind of in the middle of the state on the west side, 2 hours west of Des Moines, about an hour from Omaha, about an hour or so south of Sioux City, Iowa.
Yeah. For anyone who didn't pick up that, Father Ted can't stay up late, and maybe you hear it in his voice, he's an old fart. So if you're just listening, I think if you add Ben and my ages together, we're still younger than you.
Yeah, I think you're right.
The funny part of this whole thing is that Josh is almost always the youngest person on this podcast. And I think we were both in like the 5 youngest guys in our class.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
Yeah, it becomes difficult when you have conversations with people, and they find out you're 62 years old, and they say things like, "Oh, yeah, that's the same age as my grandparents."
we get the opposite problem. I have so many parishioners and like people from my vicarage church, people from fieldwork in St. Louis. Oh, you remind me so much of my grandson.
Yeah.
Jeez. I don't have too much. I have probably half of my congregation. I'm just a little bit older than their kids.
Yep.
But all of this is totally beside the point.
We have a point.
Depends how loosely you're willing to define point.
Yeah.
So I guess my question, and maybe we can go around and say this, but what do you think is maybe the most often or the most common source of division in an individual congregation? And then what's the most frustrating source of division to you? And that, I guess, could be in the individual congregation or in the synod at large. And if you want to think about that for a minute, Bill, we can throw Ben under the bus and make him answer first. But if you're ready, you can just go for it.
Go for it, Ben.
Okay. You're gonna have to remind me on that second question, because I was already thinking really hard about the first one. So within congregations in general, I think the biggest point of division is usually pride. People like to own their ideas, and if you don't roll with their idea, no matter how mundane that topic might be, you're gonna run into conflict. My grandma was jokingly telling a story over Christmas. I went up and saw her and my grandfather, and she was telling a story of she would get reports from the church voters meetings from her husband, featuring 2 guys that could not agree on anything. And that meant that if it was clearly sunny outside and one of them stated the obvious that it was sunny outside, the other guy would argue that it was raining. because he could not swallow his pride to say that the other guy was right. And I mean, that I think that happens on any and every scale, from what color should the walls be, to how do we best serve our neighbors, and anywhere in between. Pride is an incredibly difficult thing to swallow and to overcome. What was the second question, Josh?
What's the most frustrating thing churches divide over?
Oh, that's also a good question. I think to me the most frustrating thing that churches divide over are kind of along the same lines, but when decisions are made in self-interest and it causes people to feel ostracized and want to leave. I feel like usually it happens in one of two directions. Either there's an old guard that wants to preserve everything that they've known and held to be true, and even if something that they used to do is completely untenable, they will hold on to that thing for the life
You're
of
using
them.
a lot of SAT words today, Ben.
Yeah, you know what? Deal with it. And they ostracize anyone new coming in. But it also happens the other way, where church leadership will be focused so much on bringing in new folks that they will throw out the baby with the bathwater and just eliminate anything that smells old-fashioned for the sake of bringing in new people, and ostracize anyone that's been there long enough to remember the old. So yeah, I think exclusionary stuff, we're going to go with another SAT word here.
Who are you trying to show off to?
No one. I'm just more awake than normal, so my brain is actually finding the vocab I had to learn in high school.
And I find that very shocking, Ben. I didn't see this side of you when I was trying to recruit you to come to the seminary. I was,
Sure you
know,
did.
I was trying to
You
catch
know
you on a
my
good day. And you weren't going to have to take the SAT again or anything, but
you saw my GRE scores. I scored high.
I am bound by FERPA not to talk about this right now.
I'm pretty sure that I outscored Josh on the math section, which I would like to
Bet.
What'd you get?
I was in the 99th percentile.
So was I.
Well, then I'd have to go back and actually look up my score.
When I did my part for you in that math was not my forte, so I helped populate the other part of the spectrum so that they would have other people on it, so that the two of you could be listed. But I'm not going to allow this to become a conflict with me.
Oh, not going to divide over.
Bless you.
Anyway, so what about you, Padre? What division do you think is seen most, and then what is most frustrating to you?
The one that I see that I wish there was something like a thermometer you could check this, where if you're cooking something and you don't want it to get you don't want it overcooked, but you want it to be at a safe level. I wish there was a way to put a thermometer in to judge without having to do all the work, know how communication is going on. What I see is the number one or very frequent cause of conflict when the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability is compromised. That can happen because there's a club, there's a group of people within a congregation that are trying to change the direction, but they're not talking about it. They're not dialoguing with other people. They have a hidden agenda and are sometimes rallying other people around it. And then all of a sudden you start feeling that, well, I'm not a part of that group. And I get looked down upon when I speak at a meeting. And you guys know it because you're younger, and I remember it, that sometimes you get looked down on because of your youth. And I get concerned that the conflict in a congregation can start if we'll use older people, but it can happen with either group. If older people are trying to protect what they see as being the core value of a congregation, by not necessarily communicating as well, or not being fully transparent with everything from finances to plans, or whatever it is. When that starts happening, that's when conflict starts, because you lose trust, you lose any sense of being a part of this. And it leads to a lot of suspicion, and people leave, get hurt feelings. And I would, when I was not a parish pastor, but working at the seminary and was attending meetings at church, it was nice to sit back and watch the dynamics and not have to work with it, and see, being able to be an observer instead of being engaged as the pastor. And sometimes it's extremely sad when you see that, but that's the one that I would say is there's just not, we're not being open with one another. One that I put right below that, just to mention it quickly, is that it's really difficult to ask for or offer forgiveness, that sometimes the hurt becomes a reason for division, as a reason to transfer to another congregation, to go to another church and another church body. And that's part of that. It's kind of connected. The one that I would say is most frustrating, and I hear this because I come in as those new eyes, and when I hear stuff like, oh, pastor, everybody knows that. No, they don't. Or, the kind of, we've always done it that way. And it can be sometimes the most minor thing. On a positive note, sometimes it's less frustrating that I choose to, and where I am, Josh, where Ben is, Josh, it's cold, but I still like standing outside unless it's absolutely pouring, or the snow is coming in horizontally. I like to be outside to greet people. It helps me, to learn names. It helps to also just engage with people before you stand up in front of them and lead the service. But I find it frustrating when if somebody were to come after me, and if they would say, well, Pastor Reedy always greeted everybody outside. It's like, seriously? That is so frustrating, because it's not like we all came out like the old Play-Doh factories, where you cram the Play-Doh in one side, push down the lever, and you get something uniform at the end. We all come into ministry with our personalities. The same way with members. I think we do a lot of things with trying to assimilate people into a congregation, do gifts inventory and all this stuff. But then how open are we to say, wow, we could do? So that's where I get frustrated, when there's a sense of the clubbiness to it, or stuck in a ritual.
Yeah, I think, and I guess I've been blessed, because I was thinking of all the congregations I've been a part of, and none of them, to my knowledge, had significant conflict. Right, there wasn't a lot of yelling at voters' meetings. That's not to say there wasn't conflict, but it wasn't like they weren't calling in reconcilers or anything. But when I think about it, I wonder if one of the most insidious divisions in churches, and I bet you can find this at almost any church, is a division between like the real members and not like, and let me explain what I say when I say that. I mean, like, do the people who are in church every Sunday look down on people who only maybe make it a few times a month? And do I think you should be in church every Sunday? Yeah, you should be in church every Sunday. But I'm also like, I recognize that life happens, and you should not be looked down on because you missed a Sunday, or whatever the righteousness is at the church. So being involved in certain groups or serving in certain ways, like, I wonder if that isn't maybe a more subtle division, but where people are like, well, I'm in church every Sunday, that person isn't, so don't do that. But and this is really reductive of me, but the most frustrating one for me to see is the stupid division over worship styles. Everybody get over it, right? Like, just calm down. There are bigger things to deal with. Stop it. Everybody stop it.
My favorite point to make whenever that comes up is give me 20 years from now and find all of the organists in the United States. We're not going to have enough to cover all of our churches. So guess what instrument is going to be prevalent enough to lead our worship?
The theremin. Oh, what a person.
I pulled out my guitar for any of our audio listeners here.
You did. Like that one guy at college who ruins everything.
I enjoy that discussion when worship becomes the divider, is especially if people are pipe organ only, which are I learned to play the pipe organ in college, and it was a great thing. I was
How
never
did I not know you could play the pipe organ?
because I don't play it well enough to do it beyond my own enjoyment. I've played for churches with a lot of practice, but the thing is that when people equate organ accompaniment with being biblical or something, and that any other instruments are a violation and an abomination in the eyes of God. Well, I guess, I haven't asked here yet if we have people that play the timbrel, or maybe we need, tambourine is in the Bible, and zither,
The
and
lyre.
yeah, a lyre.
Don't
And
forget
so
about the horn.
I find the instrumentation bit to be, because I've been at because I would do pulpit supply around. I was at churches that the entire service was, the music portion was off of DVDs or MP3 players, whatever they use. And it was like, wow, they're doing something because they don't have those musicians. They don't have, because there's not that many people that have learned to play. And even a keyboard, there's some people that can, there's some people that can't, but you can program them. So yeah, when I get it, those are the things that, yeah, we get divided on some weird stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that happens in both congregations, and like the synodical level still argues about stuff like that. But then also you'll get like the people in the traditional service will judge the people in the contemporary service, or vice versa. And it's like, guys, it's calm down.
And both because I've been a pastor for 22 years, but also I'm getting closer to being a consumer of pastoral care in retirement and in my dotage. That's another good word, dotage. That my hope is that my pastor will pray the Lord's Prayer with me, will know enough music that if we sing during a visit or something, that we can do that. But also I think about what do guys need to bring to the table now as a pastor, and how do we do that? I think it's still the most marvelous thing that if we have opportunities through our field work, through our vicarage and other things, to get as much exposure as we can. On my vicarage, my pastor actually, usually it was once a month, he would send me to other churches to see because he'd been in that circuit forever. He knew churches that he wanted me to visit, just so I didn't think that the way we did it at Christ Lutheran Church for the Deaf in Silver Spring, Maryland was the only way to do anything. That was helpful for me. And to see these wonderful Christians gathered, and none of them were the same.
Yeah, I've always, Bierman had this suggestion when he got on one of his rants about worship. He's like, I think if we were doing this right, worship would look a little bit different every Sunday. Yeah, one Sunday you do high church, maybe the next week you have an acoustic guitar and you sit around a campfire or something. I was like, oh, that's an idea.
And drawing that into the whole topic of conflict is that sometimes when these become the battle lines, when there's something different or whatever, it's cheap shots. Oh, that's this, that, or the other thing. That's what this person does, or that. do you really know? I when it comes to conflict, one of the things that I find extremely frustrating is when people think they can say something with no proof. Um, it's we don't treat each other very well at all when you have people that are making claims against somebody, and it's all hearsay, it's gossip, it's a violation of the eighth commandment because they're not looking to see about putting the best construction on everything. That hurts when you can just do what we used to do on the playground. You can say, things about somebody and it doesn't have to be substantiated, and that doesn't work real well in the church.
Yeah. Which I think plays into maybe where the conversation should go next, and that's how do you avoid it? Right? How do you keep yourself from these divisions, and frankly, how do you keep yourself from these silly arguments that people have, that Paul here is saying, in, like, to circle back to our text, he is saying it is sinful. He is saying that it is not right for us to be divided. So how do we avoid it?
Because I'm new where I go, I tend to wear a name tag. And so, I'm not Apollos, it's right there. That's my name. And it's all when I'm having a discussion with somebody and they say, well, Pastor so-and-so did it. It's like, well, nope, I'm not him.
Let me check quick.
But I just think that yeah, it's people can be harsh, and we don't always listen real well to other people. I don't know if this is in line of what you're thinking, but I try to work with, whether it's at a meeting and whoever's chairing that specific meeting or a voters meeting, I'm always concerned about the people that are either too afraid to speak, are too intimidated to speak, they're not in the right group to be speaking, and to let's continue to honor and listen to everybody. A tool that I've seen other people use is to even get to the point of, especially if it's a bigger decision, pausing, praying about what it is that you're voting on, and then restate it, not just the way it's written in a formal motion, but what does this mean? What are the ramifications? What are all of this? And does anybody want to speak to something that we haven't heard yet? Not to beat a horse so that we continue driving, but let's try to draw out, to give people that comfort, that safe place where they can speak freely without judgment. That's hard. And that's not just a church thing, that's in other organizations and the world in general. But how can we facilitate it better in a church? So I don't know if I strayed too far from your point, Josh.
No, I think that's where we need to be. Like, you make sure that you're not rushing through things, and that you're listening, especially when it comes to divisions over decisions. And I think a part of that you kind of touch on is to act, like, be in relationship with one another. Like, it's a lot harder to be divided from your friends, like, even if you disagree with them. So I wonder if we put a higher priority on, like, building relationships with each other in churches and building our communities. A lot of the division, like, disagreements will still be there, but I feel like they won't devolve into divisions if we spend more time listening to each other and spend more time just being in relationship with each other.
And not saying to take a Bible study time or whatever, but if we did just say on a Saturday morning, if there's something that, whether it's a building project or a renovation or a new program or something, what if we got together in a less formal environment, a non-decision making group, encouraging everybody to come together and talk through this, especially if it's something that's really hard to get your head around. Like, we're going to commit $8 million to doing a new building project and all this, to have that those informational town hall type meetings, so that there can be discussions and more buy-in before you get to the point where a motion is on the floor and we have to do this. Haven't done it much, but I find it very helpful to have those discussions outside of a meeting, outside of parliamentary procedure, just to help communication.
I
Either of
try
you
to have
that
as
money
many
lying around?
conversations as possible outside of parliamentary procedure.
Either of you have those $8 million lying around? We could use it.
Talk to me on Friday after the Mega Millions drawing, and I'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good.
You know what? Actually, just you'll know, because if I win that lottery, I'll Venmo you the $8 million.
I'll let you work with our finance director if that happens.
Oh no! I'm just gonna give you $8 million.
Okay.
Part of my strategy, if I ever win the lottery, is essentially I'm gonna just give so much of the money away that when people come and ask me for money, I can genuinely say, "Sorry, I already gave it all away."
And what you're talking about, what we're talking about is whether or not they said it to you when you were at the SEM, but we were encouraged to be hope mongers. I find that if individuals start being able to embrace hope, whether it's working through a conflict or a time of financial difficulty in the church or whatever it is, that if and I think about this with people that are in physical rehab, they have to do something so they can get out of rehab and return home and gain independence. To a person, what keeps them going to physical therapy or occupational therapy or whatever it is every day is that they have a goal that, you know, the doctors have written down and said, this is where you can be, but it means you're going to have to do these activities. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to be committed to it. You can't just have hope thinking that we come to enough meetings or go to enough of this or give enough money. You have to have that unified goal. And if we're to the point of being able to say, we have hope because we have this common drive. And my other, not quite as eloquent as hope mongers, but the opposite for me is when you have the joy suckers, that you can have a whole bunch of people that are just, they really do get hope. They're motivated. They're not denying all the challenges, but they're unified and trying to work on it. Sometimes a person can walk into a room and you just feel the joy just get sucked right out with them because they are that kind of person that comes in and
They just suck.
They do. And it's just like the joy just left the room. And that I find that's just sad.
Yeah. You got to feel for them though, because like you have to, if you have someone like that, you have to deal with them for whatever context you know them in. They got to live like that.
Did you ever see any of the old Saturday Night Live episodes with Debbie Downer?
How old do you think we are?
Well, it's
I've seen clips on YouTube.
Yeah, these were even in color, and they had sound. But you know, Debbie Downer was one of these people who could find everything, and she's not the same as a joy sucker because but it's just one of those things where there's some people that I think are hardwired. They're given to negativity. They don't find that, and yeah, it's just you're old enough to go back and find Debbie Downer. I'll send you a link if you need it.
No, okay. We're young enough to go and find Debbie Downer because we are masters of the internet.
There you go. I hope you're a master of the internet and the internet's not your master.
That's hopeful because any AI that they have ever said learn from the internet how to be a person ends up like really a bad person. So
but picking up again on the passage from First Corinthians, I didn't baptize Jesus this last week, but I preached on the baptism of Jesus. And isn't that an amazing, for me, it's such a conflict resolution moment. When you look out over the congregation, it's easy because I don't know everybody yet. But if you look out and say, our common denominators were baptized, we're all wet. We are all washed. And when you bring it down to that common denominator, that's a better place to start than to look at what ticks you off about people, but look at the fact that, we look in the mirror every morning, but when we look around, we're seeing other people that are baptized. They're Christians. And that's a much better approach than looking at them automatically as the enemy.
Yeah. Well, and I'm gonna speak to my context a little bit, because it's not safe to assume everyone's baptized.
Okay.
Definitely not out in the world. Mostly, I guess you could assume that in the church, but if you're trying to avoid division, you don't even have to look you can look even more fundamentally and say that's someone Jesus loves. And I think you can apply that more societally speaking. Like, you see things on the news, or you see people doing things that tick you off or would be a source of division. You can look at that person and say, Jesus loves that person.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus loved that person enough to die for them. I can at least be loving toward them. I can at least be civil toward them. So,
Yep.
Yeah, look for that common denominator.
I think
Do we want to go ahead,
I was
Ben?
going to say another common denominator, just to throw one out there.
Man buns.
Well,
Padre.
it's a little too smooth up there.
There's not enough there to make a bun, even if it all grew.
For anyone who's just listening, Father Ted does not have a man bun. Even if you gathered all the hair on his head into one spot, it probably still wouldn't be a man bun. So he keeps it high and tight.
Anyway, one of the things that I kind of encountered walking into this congregation, they were not necessarily actively a church in conflict when I got here, but they were certainly a church bearing the scars of conflict. And so one of the things that I keep like stopping myself and saying is, like, we're all broken. We are all in need of something. We can't just assume that everyone's going to act perfectly the way we want them to. And so if we come into a conversation, if we come into especially when we do like these monumental kind of direction shifts in churches, we can't assume that things are always going to go smoothly. Coming in here, a lot of my early messages were around like loving people, because people bearing fresh scars are an easy reminder that there's a lot of brokenness in the world. We need to come together as a community first. And then from there, we can be the hands and feet of Christ. But if we're not willing to accept that everyone around us is probably, or we are broken, and everyone around us is probably just as broken as we are, we're not going to get anywhere fast. No.
Spitting facts over there, Ben.
You're
Shall
welcome.
we move to takeaways?
Yeah, we can do that.
So, how we close each episode here at Man Buns and Jesus, Father Ted, and anyone who hasn't listened to episodes before,
Is that we
each just
don't warn our guests that we're going to ask them for one takeaway at the end of the episode. And then we ask for
them
just
for
like one
sentence, if like a bullet point. Someone just finished listening to this podcast. What do they need to know? What do they need to carry with them going forward?
Josh, you want to go first?
I'll go first. Be in relationship with people. Like, prioritize making friends at church, and hopefully, if you do that enough, hopefully you'll never have to really deal with serious divisions at your church.
Father Ted?
I'm censoring. Well, when I was recruiting, I would tell some guys that just don't be a jerk.
That was episode 1.
Oh, it was? Because there's guys that came in a little bit too self-confident, self-assured, and it fits in with what Josh was talking about, that, people are people, people are individuals. Jesus healed the blind man of his blindness, the deaf man of his deafness. He didn't come in and say, well, I'm going to give you, he was focused on what the people were. And if we can, I wish if this is something we could teach, I don't know. But if we allowed ourselves more time, sometimes we're so wanting to get something moving forward. Would it help if we hit the brakes, or people say, pump the brakes, pump the brakes? Just now you have anti-skid, which maybe that's what our faith and our life together needs to have, is ability to keep us from ramming into each other and causing that conflict, causing division, but to step back enough to remove ourselves from things enough that it's not about me and my position, but what are we doing? And I'm going to find one way to hammer this in one way or another, but I still am amazed at First Kings 3, when Solomon he was working with the 2 prostitutes over one baby. And I think sometimes if we looked at it, that if there's a conflict, we'll just say in a school, what are we doing to support our students and our teachers? Yes, we have to pay the bills and stuff, but I think sometimes we're so looking at things in a different way that let's look at the child. Let's look at this. How can we cause success, hope, joy in the ministry without taking a sword and cutting it in half and the whole thing dies? So there's a bunch in there, but I would say to always keep focused on our mission, the gospel, but for the unity in the body of Christ, that we would give honor and glory to his name and put things aside that get in the way of that.
All right, Ben, give us some wisdom to close this out.
Ted, were you going to say something along the lines of "Don't be a smart"? Is that where you were censoring yourself?
DBAD.
Something like that. Yeah, it's like because I was going to go to an ordination and lay my hands and tell them, don't be a jerk. 1 Reedy 3:12.
I want a sign with that engraved on it to put in my office forever. Citation and everything. All right.
All right. I'm gonna go with don't get bogged down in the details. When we started with the both the things that most often cause conflict and the things that frustrate us that cause conflict, like almost always the devil is in the details. People fight over the smallest things because they think it's going to radically change the world. It won't. Your church community will largely still be your church community. And if somebody is bringing something forward to your church in efforts to improve your ability to spread the gospel, to be in community, to serve your neighbor, to love God, give them the benefit of the doubt, and approach it with hope.
There you go. So if you have heard this podcast, if you've listened through, first of all, congratulations for making it through another episode of Man Buns and Jesus. But also, we'd encourage you share this with your friends, especially maybe those who are in positions of leadership in their churches. Whether that's so distracting. Whether that's like a pastor or something who could maybe benefit from this, or if someone is on some board or some leadership, maybe this will be helpful for them. Feel free to share it. And time for the other shameless plugs. Subscribe to our podcast on whatever you listen to podcasts on. We're on Spotify, we're on Pandora, we're on iHeartRadio, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all of the main ones. And I'm finding out even some of the non-main ones, because I get like random emails to claim our podcast on like podcast platforms I've never heard of, and I'm like, I'm not going to go through the effort. You're already like putting my podcast out there. I don't care at this point. So subscribe to us because it makes us feel good and justifies the time we spend on this. And we do have a Facebook page. You can like it if you want. We don't care about that one nearly as much. But if you want to come on as a guest or you have a topic you would like us to tackle, and you don't know us personally, the Facebook page is a way that you can get in touch with us and reach out to us personally. So,
And they're inclusive. They're inclusive of non-bunners.
People without man
oh,
buns.
non-man buns.
Right.
I was like, are you saying if you don't have? Never mind. We're gonna move forward.
I'm
brothers
pretty
and
sure you're not
sisters.
the most follically challenged guest we've ever had, Father
I
Ted.
bet. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not gonna throw anyone under that bus today. Brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.